To be totally honest, I've always had Sunday Bloody Sunday filed away in my head as a sports movie, so I didn't watch it. Maybe I was thinking of Any Given Sunday. I'm not sure. That's a sports movie, right? Sunday Bloody Sunday is the opposite of a sports movie, really. If you don't like sports, this is the movie for you. It's an extremely mature look at the real-life adult would-you-rathers that just about everyone faces in their relationships, their careers, and in their lives. The basic idea is that Glenda Jackson and Peter Finch, two legendary actors, are both in a relationship with the same man, played by the younger and less well-known Murray Head. It's not a question of an affair or of a secret. Everybody knows about each other. The question is what's going to happen when the main man, Murray Head's bisexual character Bob Elkin, when he decides he wants to go to New York to further his career as an artist. Actually, maybe the question is, what can we really hope for in life? It seems like nobody in this movie is really getting enough. And what do you do when the way that your life is set up doesn't give you enough, doesn't meet your needs? Are they needs? Not sure. More often than not, this ends up being a question about romantic life and about maybe the nature of love. After a couple of weeks where I took a brief vacation from my senses and reviewed some nice comedies, we're back to the tormented psychological realism. And in that regard, this movie is right up my alley. But there is something different about Sunday Bloody Sunday compared to most of the social dramas that I have covered. Normally, this type of movie is all about turmoil and conflict, and this is a pretty tormented movie, but it doesn't have quite as much conflict as you might expect. There are a number of places where it sets up what seems like it will be a huge fight, but things end up being resolved less painfully than in the average sober adult film. For instance, Glenda Jackson, Alex, that's her character, and Bob start the movie by house-sitting for a family with a bunch of children and pets. And something goes wrong. I won't spoil what it is. It seems like there's going to be a huge problem when the parents come home, but I will spoil this and tell you that it turns out that the parents are totally used to things going wrong in their big, chaotic family, and they don't really make a big deal out of it at all. This thing that you think is going to be a big conflict actually is resolved without too much suffering. There are a number of subplots that follow a similar pattern. So if you're into this type of movie, the psychological realism or whatever, because you like being sad, and you're looking for a movie that's really going to destroy you, Sunday Bloody Sunday is pretty sad, but it doesn't steer right towards conflict all the time, like a lot of the movies that I've covered on this channel do. In some ways, this might be a virtue. In fact, it might be even more mature, might be a more mature way to look at the world, because it turns out a lot of issues in this here life do resolve themselves, even if some of the big underlying questions and dissatisfactions linger, always teetering on the edge of acceptance. Of course, this house-sitting scenario is pretty ingenious because it takes Alex and Bob and puts them into a traditional family just for a weekend. This is going to stir up a lot of questions about what they want, or maybe the questions are about how this other couple could possibly survive so much chaos and whether they are really happy, or whether or not this model for being happy, for having the sort of upper middle class lifestyle, is the kind of thing that would make anybody happy. We also meet Alex's parents, who have a very traditional relationship. In some ways, they are very successful. They have a big house. But is her mother happy? You'll have to watch the movie to decide. Alex's mother is played by Peggy Ashcroft, by the way, the second cast member that this movie shares with my all-time favorite movie. This movie sneakily shows us a wide slice of society. I mentioned already, we see the insides of a couple of different families. It also gives us a lot of perspectives through Peter Finch's character, Daniel Hirsch, who's a doctor. For instance, it opens with Hirsch examining a patient. Peter Finch is really good in this movie. Was he taking some kind of risk by playing a gay character? Maybe, but he's great. Anyway, he starts the movie by examining someone's stomach. Hirsch has an interesting bedside manner because this is sort of a movie about feelings and torment, so you might expect him to be particularly sensitive or something. He's not insensitive, but there's a couple of scoops of a traditional gruff doctor in him, and his patience seems to be worn thin, not his patience, but his patience. The guy he's examining is also a bit grumpy. The first line in the movie is, "Tell me if you feel anything at all," and the patient says, "No." This touching and prodding in their somewhat stilted communication is an apt way to start the movie. And in fact, you don't even need to bother watching the rest of the film, just catch the first 30 seconds. Anyway, as a doctor, Daniel Hirsch sees a lot of life beginnings and endings, all the stuff in between, too. I think he lives in his office or above his office, and phone calls are constantly butting into his personal life. So he's kind of got this omnipotent perspective on life, but it's a bit sterile and professional. I won't go on and on about this. Suffice to say that Hirsch is an interesting character. His job as a doctor allows Schlesinger to stick some poignant moments in. Like I said, to sneak in a lot of different angles, a lot of different parts of the world, make it into this movie that's ostensibly just about three people. We also have a compelling picture of someone who is, in some ways, well established in life, a doctor, in some ways in league with society's institutions, in some ways experienced. He's seen it all, and he knows how to handle the pressures and the stresses of life or something. But he's also pretty uncertain and maybe overlooked and probably unfulfilled. There's a great scene where Hirsch goes to a bar mitzvah. It's a chance to think about how he fits into this community. Earlier, actually, Bob asks him, "Do you really feel Jewish?" And the answer seems to be, no. This is a great little hook to set up the bar mitzvah. It hits like a plot twist when we walk into the synagogue. When you have movies that are so finely tuned to work on these small plot points, something as simple as paying back that earlier hook can really be a fun twist in the film. Anyway, there's at least two things going on in this scene. For one, Hirsch is thinking back to his own bar mitzvah. There's a somewhat clunky flashback here, one of a couple somewhat clunky flashbacks in the movie that I think we would probably be better without. But still, the memory aspect is fairly subtle because there's no obvious conclusion. Hirsch seems to be thinking about how time has passed, about all the decisions in this kid's future and all the decisions in Hirsch's past. It's hard to put it into words, but maybe you felt something like this at a big event that sort of celebrates time passing, perhaps an annual event with the family or something like that. Anyway, the other big angle here is that Hirsch is not out to this crowd, which includes his father. There's a woman who tries to do some social conducting. She tells Hirsch that he'll be at a table with a recent widower, just his age, and she says, "Oh, you should try to make a good impression on her." This sets up a fairly awkward conversation later on where neither Hirsch nor this woman are getting what they need, neither one getting enough. Obviously, homosexuality is a big part of this movie. John Schlesinger was openly gay, and even in 1971, there weren't a lot of movies that got this quite right. I've been thinking about reviewing The Boys in the Band. Let me know if I should. Actually, sometimes I think that's a sports movie too, but that's The Boys in the Boat, something quite different. Anyway, Sunday Bloody Sunday doesn't seem to be making a big issue out of its gay characters. It's a humanist film, first and foremost, but that's kind of a big achievement, and it might be one of the reasons why the movie doesn't feel dated at all. Of course, people are driving old cars, and they very rarely look at their cell phones, but with all the things that matter, I don't know, this movie could have been made like yesterday. At least that is my sense. So we've already touched on a bunch of themes here. Let me mention a couple more. Communication is front and center. That's pretty obvious, and it's going to be true in basically every social drama. There's going to be people communicating or failing to communicate. The drama is from communication, but in this movie, the telephone plays a big role. Again, not too uncommon, but we really foreground things here with a bunch of shots of the relays clicking over at the telephone exchange. An answering service is a big part of the plot. I guess that part of the movie is a bit dated. People are constantly being interrupted by the phone or trying to get a hold of one another. I don't see this as a movie about technology exactly, but it's interesting that we have people struggling to communicate throughout the film. They can't do it very well in person. They can't really advocate for themselves, and they can't do it very well over the phone. It seems like some of the issues they have, not being able to make a connection, not being able to get a hold of each other, just missing each other on the phone, are some of the same problems they have when they're in person, face to face. In some ways, a very intimate relationship, but also one where a lot is not able to be communicated. Aging is another interesting aspect of the film. Bob is younger than his two lovers. Hirsch is significantly older, in part due to Finch's last-second casting. Alex is also older. Glenda Jackson plays an age that does not exist in Hollywood, an age where many of her peers have children or careers. Alex is on the verge of quitting her job, and her boyfriend, if you can call him that, might be on his way to New York. Personally, I wouldn't recommend going there. In some ways, this is a movie about aging, or at least aging strikes a chord of uncertainty and loss that rings throughout the whole film. Anyway, last point, you might walk away from this movie thinking that polyamory is doomed, unworkable, and I think that's actually a reasonable conclusion. But I took the relationship at the center of this movie not to be the root cause of all this torment and uncertainty, but kind of to be more of another symptom. I'll leave that as a discussion question. Those are some of the main themes. That's kind of the vibe of this movie. I'm not sure how much more to take it apart. Overall, Sunday Bloody Sunday is great. If you like mature films, this is one. Hey, bonus points because it was written by a film critic for the New Yorker, Penelope Juliet, so maybe there's still hope for me to write a famous movie, but probably not before next week when we'll be back with another review. One brief side note for anyone sticking around is that my channel is now eligible for YouTube AdSense, and I'm not really planning to make any money in this endeavor. In fact, my goals are kind of the opposite, but I will be experimenting a little bit with seeing how enabling ads in certain places might affect the algorithm, might get the videos to more people. Shouldn't be too intrusive. I'm going to try and keep this as minimal as possible, especially as YouTube cracks down on ad block. I personally don't really think it would make sense to subject anyone to an advertisement just for the privilege of listening to me ramble about these movies. But anyway, there may be some experimentation going on the channel. You may notice that, or you might not. Anyway, great to be here in 2025. We have a whole year, probably, of interesting movies coming up. If you have any you think I might like, please suggest one. This one was suggested by a viewer and a great suggestion that I thoroughly enjoyed watching and thinking about.